The Galactic Empire spanned galaxies, its dominion unchallenged for centuries. Alien species, their hearts cold with ancient power, bent the knee to the Empire's authoritarian grip. Planets were consumed by the Empire's technologically superior fleet, and civilizations either adapted to subjugation or disappeared altogether. Humanity, still a young species with only a scattering of colonies, was regarded as nothing more than an emerging race, not worthy of standing beside the true giants of the universe. To them, humanity was a rebellious child, whose attempts to climb the galaxy's ladder were too weak to even cause a ripple in the Empire's centuries-old foundation. Among the Empire's leaders, whispers of humanity's development had become nothing more than an occasional source of amusement. But none foresaw what was coming. General Alexander Thorne. Thorne was humanity's greatest asset, a tactician unparalleled, a warrior carved from the ideals of loyalty, sacrifice, and unyielding honor. An orphan raised on Earth's desolate backwaters, Thorne's military career was nothing short of legendary. Despite being from a broken world, he was forged in the crucible of Earth's resistance wars, rising to become the commander of the United Earth Forces UEF. He wasn't just a soldier, he was the embodiment of human potential, their brightest star. What made Thorne different wasn't just his brilliance. It was his extraordinary capacity for understanding his adversaries. With an innate understanding of not just tactics but diplomacy, Thorne was the kind of leader who could plan an ambush at dawn and negotiate a peace treaty by dusk. But his true genius lay in his most audacious belief that humanity could someday stand on equal footing with the oldest, most powerful empires in the galaxy. One such moment arrived when Earth found itself on the brink of open conflict with the Galactic Empire. The Earth Alliance, a federation of humanity's scattered colonies and nations, had long been caught between conflicting desires. On one hand, they sought peaceful coexistence with their galactic neighbors. On the other, they needed to defend their rapidly expanding colonies from the growing greed of the Galactic Empire. Diplomatic discussions, led by Earth's finest, had frequently been crushed beneath the Empire's condescension and brute strength. Attempts at peace often resulted in nothing more than a well-meaning speech from Earth's finest diplomats, met with terse and final dismissals from the Empire's aristocratic leadership. Humanity's decision seemed inevitable. Thorne was called to action as both a diplomat and a leader, a task demanding not only military might, but a spirit to inspire hope when the future appeared bleak. Inside a dimly lit command room on the massive UEF flagship Endurance, Thorne stood silently. The hollow display hummed softly in front of him as he stared at the planetary map. Nearby, high-ranking military officers bustled in preparation for the potential war that might await. Thorne's sharp mind, which had formulated strategies to stave off alien attacks on distant colonies, now raced toward the upcoming diplomatic mission that might prevent humanity's descent into war. He alone stood between peace or annihilation. He wore no armor now, just the simplicity of a soldier's uniform, dark and adorned only with his insignia, a simple silver star on his chest. It spoke of honor, of achievements on battlefields long past, and now it represented the weight of the stakes before him. Peace with the Empire was impossible, perhaps, but war would be a choice to end all choices. Humanity would never be able to retreat. Yet peace was what Thorne desired above all else. He didn't want to wage war against the Empire, despite his utter contempt for the way they mistreated his people. The galaxy needs something new, Thorne often said. A new power, forged from ideals of fairness, liberty, humanity. But the Empire didn't understand nor care for his vision. In the Imperial Senate, their pompous decision-makers, alien aristocrats of every species, held no empathy for the human race, their eyes distant as they watched an old hologram of Earth's barren forests. They viewed it as a primitive rock, nothing more than a resource awaiting conquest. When the issue of Earth's continued expansion into space was raised, the Empire issued a declaration. Humanity's frontier reaches too far. If it continues unchecked, it threatens to undermine our territories and influence. When Thorn traveled to the capital for one final peace mission, accompanied by representatives of the Earth Alliance, the chamber was cold, gleaming with the arrogance of 1,000 years of supreme power. There, an official of the Empire greeted them without warmth, her demeanor as ice-cold as the farthest reaches of space. "General Thorn," she intoned, "what a rare human delicacy to grace our chambers." "How quaint." Thorn remained unshaken, his voice steady as he replied, "I'm here for my people. Nothing more, nothing less. It is you who must decide. Will you let this be a peaceful transition, or must we fight?" The Empire's response was swift. "Humanity's presence on the galactic stage is one we can tolerate no longer. Your time as the Empire's equals will come to a close with this final confrontation." As their words echoed throughout the chamber, Thorn's soldiers and Earth's finest generals held their collective breath. But one thing was undeniable. Thorn would never kneel to them. The formal meeting lasted only minutes. And so began the countdown to humanity's moment of reckoning. With one final glance at the holographic map and his officers' eyes filled with uncertainty, Thorn stepped away from the console, an overwhelming certainty replacing every doubt in his mind. If the Empire wanted war, they would get one they would never forget. But humanity would fight, and they would win. The starship Endurance glided through the stars toward the Imperial capital, its towering frame casting a long shadow across the quiet reaches of space. General Thorn stood at the command bridge, gazing into the darkness. Every fiber of his being was filled with the calm before the storm. This mission, this final opportunity to avert a bloodbath, weighed heavily on him. His leadership and the future of humanity itself depended on the negotiations ahead. Behind him, the hum of consoles and whispers of officers preparing for the worst broke the silence. Thorn didn't look back. He was focused. Everything hinged on how these next hours would unfold. If this meeting failed, humanity's worst nightmare would soon be realized. War with a power far more ancient and formidable than anything Earth had ever faced. "We're entering orbit around Zareth 4. A voice called out behind him, snapping Thorn from his thoughts. "We'll be docked within the hour." Thorn nodded, but deep down he felt a gnawing sense of unease. Despite every hopeful plea he made in the past, despite Earth's repeated calls for diplomacy, he knew the Empire's leadership was inflexible. The Empire had grown too powerful, its arrogance too entrenched to recognize humanity as a worthy adversary. But this meeting wasn't just about diplomacy. It was about survival. As Thorn and his delegation made their way through the Imperial halls, the architecture, vast and suffocating, only reinforced the growing tension. Alien representatives in ornate robes bowed their heads as they passed, their expressions devoid of any warmth. An arrogance seeped from every inch of the Empire's elite, each of them floating on the belief that they could crush the humans with mere whispers. At the heart of the capital, within a chamber of obsidian stone and flickering data columns, they stood before the Council of High Generals. The leader of the meeting, an imperious alien named Overseer Zal, wasted no time. His cold gaze settled on Thorn. "You humans have persisted longer than expected," Overseer Zal said, voice deep, echoing in the Grand Hall. "But your continued expansion, beyond what is deemed acceptable, threatens to destabilize the order we've maintained. You're nothing more than pests to be dealt with swiftly." Thorn's eyes narrowed, but he maintained composure. "We are not pests. We are not your inferiors. We seek only the ability to coexist, to offer our contributions to the universe." "The galaxy is not a democracy, Thorn," Zal retorted sharply. "It is the right of the strong to dominate. Your time of existence has come to an end." The words, spoken so coldly, pierced like a bullet. Thorn felt the heat of his anger rise, but quelled it, knowing that every word could determine their fate. There was no retreat from here. If the Empire sought war they would have, but he would ensure humanity had a chance, a fighting chance. "Then you leave me no choice," Thorn said, every word deliberate. "Prepare your forces. We will stand firm, and if it comes to war, We will bring you to your knees." The council's leaders exchanged glances, their lips curling into disdainful smirks. Thorn had spoken with every ounce of conviction he had. Sensing their superiority, they had already decided their course. The conversation was no longer one of diplomacy, but one of execution. Before he could speak again, Overseer Zal gestured to his guards. "Arrest him." Thorn's heart sank in that moment, though his exterior remained unshaken. His soldiers drew their weapons in unison, and for the first time since his rise to leadership, Thorn felt true despair. They hadn't come for peace. They'd come for his death. The Imperial soldiers moved swiftly, encircling Thorn before he could react. His men, prized officers, battle-hardened soldiers, tried to make a stand, but the Empire's superior numbers and technology quickly overwhelmed them. As the energy blast hit, it was clear. The Empire wasn't just planning for war. They intended to erase humanity's brightest light. Thorn fought with all the ferocity of his training, using every last ounce of strength to break free, but the Imperial forces had him. Before the blade could fall, his words, directed toward his soldiers, rang out. "Survive?" Then, without mercy, Zal's forces subdued Thorn. They removed the general from the battlefield with cold, efficient force. They'd seen him as a threat, a symbol of humanity's defiance. For the Empire, eliminating him would quell the uprising before it even began. Earth would cower. Humanity would follow without question. As Thorn was imprisoned aboard an enemy vessel, preparing for his fate, the news came to Earth. General Thorn has been captured. In the vacuum of space, light years away, humans who had fought for generations for their place in the galaxy suddenly saw their savior taken. And in their hearts, something more destructive began to take root. News of Thorn's capture was swift, coursing through Earth's channels, echoing through the colonies. Humanity's instinct was outrage, the kind of rage that cannot be quelled by reason, diplomacy, or force. The Empire had underestimated not just Thorn's importance, but the power of human emotion and unity. The tragic brutality of the situation didn't need words. It was felt in the deepest places of every human's being. 3 days later, it happened. As Earth watched helplessly, live feeds from Zareth broadcasted the execution. No speech, no solemnity. Thorn was killed like any other prisoner, forced to kneel before the Empire's mocking council. His final words, a quiet vow that humanity would never submit to their tyranny, faded just as the sound of his final breath echoed through history. The Empire expected submission. What they received was a declaration of war. Humanity would fight for one reason only: vengeance. They had been underestimated. They would no longer remain under the heel of the Empire's elite. General Thorn may have died, but his spirit, like fire, would soon ignite a galaxy-wide storm. The galaxy trembled as Earth, united by a singular, vengeful purpose, unleashed its fury upon the Galactic Empire. The death of General Thorn had ignited a fire that spread with the intensity of an inferno that no starship or empire could hope to extinguish. Humanity had been thrust into a conflict far beyond their ability to measure, but their resolve was unshakable. No longer were they a fringe species hiding in the corners of the galaxy. They were a force reborn, and they would make their oppressors regret ever underestimating them. In every colony, every settlement, and every city on Earth, the call for vengeance spread like wildfire. The image of Thorn's final moments, kneeling before the mocking Empire, had seared itself into the hearts of billions. His death was the rallying cry. For Thorn, for humanity, became a sacred mantra across the Earth. Men and women from all corners of humanity enlisted, ready to fight and die for a future they had believed was lost. The United Earth Forces UEF, already built on the sacrifices and hard lessons learned through generations of struggle, had never been more united. In every capital, every military base, Earth's greatest minds and warriors worked as one, a singular, determined collective. No longer was it a scattered force of different factions, competing for dominance in an uncertain universe. This was an army forged in the belief that their future mattered, and they would either rise or perish together. Commander Alana Voss, Thorne's former second-in-command, stood before a vast holographic map of the galaxy aboard the Endurance. Once merely an advisor, Alana was now entrusted with the mantle of leadership. Her face was calm, but beneath it, a storm brewed. The once soft-spoken tactician had been hardened by the death of the man who had been both her mentor and friend. "We make our stand here. This is our time," she whispered to the team gathered before her. "Where are the Empire's forces?" asked Lieutenant Rian Marcos, a younger officer who had grown in Thorne's shadow. His eyes burned with the same intensity that coursed through every human soldier's veins. "Close," Alana replied, her voice steady, unwavering. "But they're not prepared for what we can do." Thorne's strategic brilliance had been the key to turning Earth from a distant speck to a contender, and now his legacy coursed through every soldier. The Empire's forces, a scattered, sprawling fleet, had never counted on humans uniting with one heart, with the kind of personal vengeance that could carry an army forward. And so they moved swift, precise, relentless. Human forces struck first against the outer edges of the Empire's territories, aiming to recapture lost colonies and gain footholds where Empire patrols were weakest. As humanity advanced, they adapted quickly, utilizing the new technologies they had developed. The years spent studying Imperial tech during clandestine operations were now paying off. They built war machines of unimaginable capacity, repurposing the same tech used to oppress them into a deadly weapon against their former masters. The Empire, still confident in their superiority, failed to see the gravity of the shift. Their initial response was hasty, deploying fleets to quell what they saw as insignificant rebellions. But what the Empire didn't realize was that Earth had tapped into something deeper, an undercurrent of defiance that stretched across every soldier, every family member, every leader who knew what had been taken from them. The first major confrontation took place above the planet Barosphore. The Empire's flagship, Azrael, a massive, invulnerable war vessel, had arrived to crush the resistance. The battle was meant to be one-sided, yet in the face of overwhelming power, the human fleet, led by Alana Voss and fueled by rage, began to form tactics that had never been seen before. "Their flagship won't fire if we keep them on the defensive," Alana said through clenched teeth, staring at the holographic projections before her. "What?" Lieutenant Marcos asked, confused. "You're suggesting—" "I'm suggesting we let them strike first," Alana interrupted, her eyes sharp. "We'll use the miscalculation against them. They'll think we're a disorganized rabble. That'll be our edge." And so it was. The UEF fleet, seemingly disjointed and ill-prepared, appeared to retreat, letting the Empire's enormous fleet land devastating blows, all the while drawing them into a carefully planned trap. When the moment came, they struck with the precision and power humanity was beginning to wield. The Azrael, arrogantly closing in on what it thought would be a vanquished opponent, suddenly found itself surrounded. Swarming fighters and massive EMP blasts rendered its weapons useless, leaving the once unassailable ship crippled and vulnerable. The fall of the Azrael was a monumental victory, and it sent a shockwave through the Empire's ranks. A fleet commanded by a senior officer, Captain Delian, barely escaped with its life, but the humiliation was far too great to ignore. The message was clear. The humans would not simply bend and break. They would fight for every inch, and they would make it cost the Empire far more than they had ever anticipated. Despite this first victory, Commander Alana Voss knew it was far from over. The Empire, blinded by arrogance, would strike back hard, perhaps harder than ever before. And so she prepped her forces for what they all knew would be the hardest part of the war, to survive the first wave of Imperial retaliation. This moment was just a glimmer of the fire burning inside humanity. The true test would come next. But even as the galaxies watched in stunned silence, one truth became undeniable. Humanity was no longer the underdog. They were warriors, and they were just getting started.